Today, Ether dips more than 2% after Monday's rally. Hackers take over OpenAI's X account to peddle a crypto token. And former federal prosecutor Paul Tuchmann breaks down the stakes in the latest FTX cases, including SBF's appeal and Caroline Ellison's sentencing. Welcome to CNBC's Crypto World. I'm Tanea McKeel. Crypto markets down this morning after making gains yesterday. As of noon Eastern, Bitcoin lost about 0.75%, trading at $63,100. Ether dropped 2.33%, trading at $2,600, and XRP traded at 58 cents. Let's talk about the top stories. Coinbase pressed for clearer rules on digital assets during yesterday's oral arguments in its lawsuit against the SEC. For context, the exchange filed a petition for rulemaking in 2022 and legally challenged the regulator further last year to respond to its petition, which seeks clarity on what classifies digital assets as securities. Well, the SEC denied the petition back in December. Reuters reported that yesterday, Coinbase asked the court to overturn the denial, and the commission argued that adequate rules are in place. Coinbase Chief Legal Officer Paul Grewal took to X yesterday to say that Coinbase is determined to leave no stone unturned in its efforts to get more clarity for the industry. Meanwhile, Coinbase is also battling a legal challenge brought by the regulator last June, alleging securities law violations. We reached out to the SEC but didn't hear back right away. However, Chair Gary Gensler and other SEC commissioners joined a House Financial Services Committee hearing today, where Committee Chair, Republican Representative Patrick McHenry, warned that the U.S. crypto industry would fall behind to Europe's without clear regulation, and Democratic Representative Maxine Waters said she wants to strike a grand bargain on stablecoins and other bills. When McHenry directly asked if the SEC differentiates between crypto tokens and tokenized securities, Gensler said it comes down to the Howey test. Next, an official OpenAI X account seems to have been compromised to shill a crypto token. The post came yesterday on OpenAI's newsroom page on X, promoting a token to make it appear as though it was affiliated with the company. It said the token is bridging the gap between AI and blockchain tech, and that holding the token would grant access to future beta programs. The post has since been deleted with no mention of the hack by the company. We reached out to OpenAI but didn't hear back right away. Let's get to our main story. Today's the sentencing of former Alameda Research CEO Caroline Ellison, and Crypto World's Mackenzie Sagalos spoke with defense attorney and former federal prosecutor Paul Tuchmann about today's hearing. He lays out what precedent Ellison's sentencing will set for other FTX execs awaiting sentencing, plus his thoughts on SBF's appeal and recent shakeups involving former FTX executive Ryan Salem.
Okay, so let's start with Caroline Ellison of Alameda. She's set to be sentenced on Tuesday. Now, on the one hand, sentencing guidelines could go all the way to over 100 years in prison. Now, that's most likely not what she'll get. And then on the other hand, you have the probation department arguing for 3 years supervised release, and then the government broadly asking for leniency given her cooperation. Has the rhetoric from the government on this case matched your expectations? And does it set any sort of precedent if she gets away with no jail time, considering that some other FTX co-conspirators are still awaiting sentencing?
Frankly, the government's proposal and submission for Caroline Ellison doesn't surprise me in the least. It was quite clear from the evidence that was admitted at trial, and most importantly, her testimony, that she was both a critical witness for the government and also that her cooperation was in many respects extremely impressive. It was important, it was prompt, and it was sincere. That came through. I certainly believe that from what I saw of the testimony, and government clearly believed that as well. And in a case like this, where it's a very complicated financial crimes case, it's incredibly useful and important for the government to have a cooperating witness who can say that they were there on the inside and outline for the jury, from an insider's perspective, how the scheme unfolded, how it took place. And that's exactly what she did. And so the value of her cooperation was extremely high. And the other thing that's important for her is that there were many instances of consequences that she suffered as a result of her cooperation. One thinks of that typically when you have a violent crime type of case or drugs where people, their families might be threatened. Certainly there were no, as far as I know, violent threats or anything like that. However, she did suffer significantly more than the average cooperating witness in that, for example, her personal romantic life was displayed for the entire world to see, which must have been very difficult. And even more than that, Mr. Bankman-Fried released to the press her own, private diary entries in a way that was extremely violative of her privacy. And so those are the kinds of things that a sentencing judge is going to consider very strongly when considering how to sentence a cooperating witness. One other thing that I think is important, particularly now, is that there is, unlike in certain kinds of cases, there aren't victims who have lost money. Now that we know that the victims have gotten their money back, that makes it just a little bit easier for the judge to give a more lenient sentence to a cooperating witness.
And then there's also the SBF appeal. He's looking to challenge his fraud conviction, as his legal team promised to do back in November. He argues that he wasn't presumed innocent and that the jury didn't get all the facts of the FTX collapse. What do you make of the appeal from SBF? Do you feel like it has legs, or is this just a standard procedural process for his legal team?
No, I would say, he's got a new set of lawyers conducting the appeal for him who are incredibly skilled and accomplished, and have had a fair amount of success at the Second Circuit Court of Appeals over the last few years, far more than a lot of other lawyers. So he's certainly got the best legal team he possibly could have. And they've raised a number of important points, largely to do not exactly with what you would call classic legal issues, although to some extent they are, but a lot of it relates to the conduct of the case by the trial judge, Judge Kaplan. As I think was apparent to anyone who followed the trial, observed the trial, Judge Kaplan was extremely hostile to SBF and derivatively to his attorneys. And he made a lot of rulings on evidentiary issues that were somewhat controversial and aggressive in terms of bending over, I don't call it necessarily bending over backwards, but certainly taking the side of the government on issues that where, typically a defendant is permitted to present their full defense. There's a lot of, constitutional reasons for that. And in this case, the trial judge, Judge Kaplan, he really didn't let SBF or his lawyers put on a defense relating to the advice of counsel issues that they raised, which were real and serious, as well as issues relating to his intent, which is an important element of the criminal offense, his intent to commit the fraud.
And then there's Ryan Salem, a top executive who pleaded guilty to campaign finance allegations. There's been some fireworks in those proceedings recently. The judge accused him of lying about his plea deal, threatened him with sanctions. Now, given that he was already facing 7 years in prison, how serious is this issue with the judge? Could that sentence go up? Could he face new charges, or that plea deal be voided altogether?
I think that's very unlikely. I think that certainly Judge Kaplan was quite unhappy with what transpired. But essentially, right, what happened with Mr. Salem was that he was upset because he believed that he had a deal with the prosecutors that if he pleaded guilty, that his fiancée, the mother of his child, who was very young, would not be prosecuted for her role in the scheme. And so that was his understanding, at least as he's now stated. However, it's very standard practice and an important practice as part of a person's guilty plea in federal court that they be asked, as Judge Kaplan asked him when he pleaded guilty, are there any other deals that you have with the government that are not included in the written plea agreement that you have? And under oath, he said no. He said, no, there aren't any other deals. And so what he is now, by saying that, Mr. Salem was now saying, well, when I said under oath that there were no other deals, that was in fact not correct. And of course, that's going to make Judge Kaplan upset. And so that is a real issue. But, to my understanding, Mr. Salem is going to, or has said he's sort of withdrawn in effect that position. But he certainly is very unhappy about the mother of his child being prosecuted, contrary to what he says or the understandings that he had with the government.
Okay, that's all for Crypto World today. We'll be back tomorrow with more on Ellison's sentencing, and we'll see you then.